Back, in case you're just joining us, it's time for our conversation right now. At the beginning of the program, I did say we will be scrutinizing the 2020 budget as passed by the National Assembly. Of course, the 2020 budget is still awaiting the assent of the president. When he signs it, it becomes law, and hopefully we'll get the January to December cycle done. Gabriel Okorie is joining me from Lagos. Can I see him? Welcome to the program, Mr. Okorie.
Good morning. Good morning, Christy.
Good morning. It's Nancy that is here, not Christy.
Nancy, sorry.
Yes. Dr. Aliyu Audu is an economist. He's joining me here at the table. So welcome to both of you. Now let me start with Mr. Okorie in Lagos. The 2020 budget has been passed. Mr. Okorie, can I see you? Can you adjust? Yes, better. If you can hear me, just good. Better position like that. Yes. I don't need you to be shaking so that we get to see your face. Okay. The National Assembly has passed the over 10 trillion naira budget. That's 10.59 trillion naira budget. It depends on where you stand. In fact, when I was doing my own calculation with a 305 naira to $1, the budget stands at about $34.4 billion. But with a 360 naira to $1, it stands at about $29 billion. What would you actually say about this record budget that has been passed at least before the end of the year?
I think that accolade is like a cosmetic view to our budget planning performance. Because yes, it is a nice to have that the budget is passed January and then it terminates at the natural end of year. However, what is key and relevant is that the budget performs. And if you followed our budgeting for the past, let's just even say 8 years, the budget hasn't really performed at the end of the day. So even if you increase it, the truth is we haven't really delivered on what the budget and the essence is meant to do. It remains an academic exercise unless it fulfills its purpose at the end of the day.
Let me bring in Dr. Audu. Is it an academic exercise in terms of perhaps it's an academic ritual or a governmental ritual that has to be undertaken every year? The government must present a budget, whether it likes it or not. But what Mr. Okorie has said, it's now he's talking about execution and performance, which is very critical.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. As he said, for the past 8 to 10 years, we've only implemented about 60 to 70% of the budget. Reason why is because it's usually passed late, and I think some 2 years ago it was passed in June of the budget year, so you had 6 months to implement the budget. And given the Nigerian economy, the level of infrastructural deficit and a lot of deficits in the economy, it's important that the budget, which is small, it's even implemented, and the process of implementation starts early. Now, it's a positive thing for the budget to have been passed by the National Assembly and waiting for the president's signature before the fiscal year of 2020. It's a positive thing, but what we want to see is, at the end of the day, we want to see the budget fully implemented, because we have a lot of deficit, infrastructural deficit, educational deficit, health deficit. So we need to see boots on the ground. We need to see the commitment of the government by starting the implementation in January and making sure that most of the budget is implemented. That's my view.
Now, let me come back to Mr. Okorie. With this that the National Assembly has done, 58 days after the president presented the budget to the Joint Assembly, the president was at the National Assembly on October the 8th, and in fact, last week, I think December 5, the Senate or the National Assembly passed the budget. We are hoping that the January to December cycle will return. so to speak, because for a lot of analysts, they've been talking about the budget cycle. But should we now talk about which is more important now? Is it the budget cycle or budget implementation? Or do the two, are the two going together?
No, like I said, it's a nice to have. What is important is budget performance. Even the 60-70% that my fellow panelists just mentioned is highly, let me not use the word optimistic, but the 2019 budget, that's the one we're currently on. Okay, maybe we've not gotten figures for that, but for the 2018 budget, we didn't do more than 30-40%. And even in terms of revenue estimation, the federal government was able to fund the budget to the extent of 2 trillion naira for a budget that, if you remember, was about I think about 8 trillion. So it meant that it didn't even achieve.
Mr. Okorie, okay, seems the connection is poor. Let's try and reconnect you. He actually said, from your statement, which I was also coming to say that perhaps you were just overly optimistic. The budget has not really, performed 60 to 70%. If we're even seeing a 60 to 70% performance, it should be from the recurrent expenditure side.
Yes.
Of course, because salaries will be paid and all of that.
What I did was I gave an average figure of 10 years.
Of 10 years?
Not just 2018 implementation. Yes. Now, we've had this history of not, right from the Obasanjo era, taking us back to 1999, of not implementing the budget. Now, this is why we have a lot of, in terms of infrastructural deficit. Already, our budget size compared to other countries is very small. We're talking about 25 to 30 billion in dollars. We have South Africa that is doing almost 120 billion dollars. We have Brazil that is netting almost $1 trillion. So ultimately, our budget is small, but we need to implement it because Nigeria especially is driven by government expenditures. This is where the private sector gets their money. And if you look at the various sectors we have, from agriculture to healthcare, they are looking up to the government expenses to be able to stimulate private sector activities. So, which is why I said that early implementation is very, very important. Now, looking at in terms of whether the budget is going to cater for the needs of Nigerian, is going to take care of the economy, I think that's a totally different topic. So, in my view, the passing of the budget at this stage is a good thing, but whether that can, take care of what we need as a country, that's a totally different thing. Looking at the high debt servicing that we have, and we have to also look at other ways to source revenue.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
We'll
come back to that in a bit, because the debt issue seems like a very sticky point there, not just for this 2020 budget. But Mr. Okorie, glad that you're back. The 2020 budget is a budget of sustaining growth and job creation. What growth are we sustaining? And how many jobs will the 2020 budget create? Perhaps we should even start, how many jobs the 2019 budget create? Do you understand my question?
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great. Now, the title of this budget, Growth and Job Creation, yes, is maybe in tandem with the mandate of the current administration. And you would expect that the budget speaks to delivering on these aspects. However, one thing that we have really failed to do in our budgeting is that the budget is meant to be the roadmap of the fiscal plan. And the fiscal plan defines how the federal government intends to deliver on its mandates, okay? But if you look at the budget that has been passed, and usually the budget that has been with this administration, a large percentage of our budget is on recurrent expenditure, while a small portion, about less than 25%, goes to capital expenditure, which is where infrastructure takes place. and then another quarter is even going, or less than a quarter is going for debt payments. So on the surface alone, it shows you that this was not intended, or this cannot grow the economy the way it's being touted as. Secondly, job creation does not lie in the hands of government. Job creation is at the privilege and the delivery of the private sector, which only performs when government has enabled it. Therefore, hard decisions need to be taken on this budget for it to get to where we expect it to, meaning that if we spend the bulk of our money on recurrent expenditure and debt payments, then we're not really going to grow. Two, why is our recurrent expenditure so ballooned? Why is it taking up the bulk of our little earnings? Why are we paying such a bulk to debt? And we don't even have the amounts that we're paying in debt. We don't have the amounts that we intend to put into infrastructure. And when I spoke about the fiscal aspect of it, this is where I expect the National Assembly to work with the executives to create the legal frameworks, the economic frameworks to enable the private sector to now drive, meaning they can now create opportunities like PPPs, they can create FDI opportunities, they can create other opportunities to make up the difference that is required to be able to drive this economy forward so that you will then see the growth as well as the jobs created.
Now, Mr. Okorie, let me stick with you, especially with what you just said, your last statement in terms of creating opportunities for growth. Do you think that in this 2020 budget, are there potential opportunities for investment, for local and perhaps foreign investors, bearing in mind that with the data that was released, I think 2 weeks ago, in terms of FDI and capital importation data from the NBS, Nigeria just made about, I think, $200 million in the third quarter of this year. What it says is that Nigeria is not an attractive place to do business right now. That's the Turanchi of that report, so to speak. So are there potential opportunities for investment in the 2020 budget for locals, as well as perhaps for foreign investors that are watching our space, that have taken our budget right now and taken a look at it?
There are opportunities, but like we said before, it's for the federal government to deliver on some of these mandates. Take, for example, the issue of foreign exchange. Our foreign exchange regime currently is artificial. The difference between 305 and the market rate, 360, is huge. And to keep it stable, what it means is that the federal government is spending our own hard-earned resources to maintain that. It would have worked better if it was allowed to assume a market status so that people pay for what we are using. That's one. Secondly, the deregulation within the downstream sector is key to maintaining a level of sustainability in that sector. There's a lot of investment hanging in the air, potential, simply because they cannot invest if you're going to fix the price for them. Hence the need for deregulation so that investors, both local and foreign, can come in and let the price have a market level and not what the federal government fixes. That also creates opportunities for the federal government to earn on royalties and enables Nigerians to enjoy and even expand and even become a next exporter if we're not able to consume all that is produced within. Two, the tax regime, okay? Our taxes are not the highest within the West African region. However, government needs to employ technology in different ways to enable them expand their tax nets. There are opportunities within this government, but they have to be careful how they're going about it, because if you tax the people heavily in terms of some of the new taxes they've looked at in terms of increasing VAT, the GSM tax, as well as the tax that is coming towards, I think, well, it's not so much of a tax, but the tariff on electricity will increase. These are aspects that begin to create that opportunity and rob us of those opportunities that are inherent even within this present budget. And I would also dare say that There are reforms required in land reforms. That's the Land Use Act, which have kept potential investment away simply because the value chain around real estate has not been fully
Tapped.
reviewed. Yes.
I think you're making very salient points this morning. Anyway, you know what just came to my mind? Points that every one of us do make. Perhaps it will take the World Bank again to say it, to make news, But let me come back to Dr. Audu here in the studio. You did talk about debt. And my question to you is, how should government rebalance rising debt as well as revenue? Because if you're taking a look at debt for 2020, debt servicing will go up about 2.72 trillion naira. Out of that 2.72 trillion naira, that's for local and foreign debt service. For the foreign debt is going for around 719 billion foreign debt servicing, then about 1.7 trillion for local debt servicing. So how do we rebalance debt and revenue? Can we rebalance it in this situation?
Yeah, I think it's quite possible to rebalance our debt and revenue. What we are not doing is seeking alternative revenue and income streams. Now we should look inward. In my view, I think we should look inward because we are not going to achieve growth by borrowing, and borrowing is another trap, another economic trap, because we are going to keep servicing these debts we are borrowing and will never end up paying the debts. So what we should do is to look inward and look for various income streams. And as I said, we have one of the lowest tax to GDP ratio in the world at about 6%. We need to grow that. Our tax system is greatly underdeveloped. And as a matter of fact, I think we are moving towards the retrogressive tax system. That needs to be looked into. We are only interested in taxing maybe big corporations. And there are a lot of tax that we're not implementing, like property tax, property gain tax. This is what a lot of other countries are, implementing. We're not doing that. Apart from the tax system being greatly underdeveloped, we also have to look at other sectors of the economy. Look at the mining sector, for example. We can generate income from the mining sector. Our mining is greatly undertapped because our railway is also underdeveloped. And we are letting, the informal sector to have gains in the mining sector. That's not very good. We need to block these leakages so that we can generate revenue. We are one of the highest food importers in Africa. We have a food import bill of about $5 billion. We import milk, we import sugar, and a lot of other things. Now, we produce only 2% of our sugar. That is wrong. Burkina Faso produces over 45%. Other West African countries within the West African region produce higher than Nigeria. While the African Development Bank says we have enough agrarian land to farm sugar and also to export sugar out and generate revenue. We are not doing that. Rather, we are importing sugar. India created 6 million indirect jobs through the production of sugar. So you can see what we're losing. We're losing jobs, we're also losing income, and we're losing food. So what we need to do is to invest in these various sectors of the economy. Agriculture being one of them. Now, we're borrowing and, we don't really know what, we don't have a clear roadmap of what we are borrowing to implement. Now, what I'm saying is...
That may not be true.
Well...
And I want to take you up on something.
So what we need to do is to focus, because garbage in, garbage out. Agriculture is very important. I think that is going to be the mainstay of our economy, even more than oil, because if you look at Dubai now, they choose tourism. Let's choose a sector of the economy and let's invest greatly in it. And I think agriculture is something that's going to take us very far. Now, why I'm saying that we're borrowing and we borrow and we say we're going to invest in infrastructure, but how many times are people, or are we given the privilege to be able to monitor this amount, being borrowed against the project they are being borrowed against.
Okay.
That is my worry.
When you started, you did say that debt will not give us growth. Debt will not give us growth.
Because of the high debt servicing that we keep doing. I mean, money, right now we have about 2.45 trillion, being almost 25%.
That's 2.45 trillion.
Yeah, almost 25% of our budget being paid out to service debts. Now, these debts, majority of them are local. Now, what is happening if we are using our budget to service local debts? The government is now taking the bulk of, of lending in the domestic market. Now, we are crying that businessmen don't have money to borrow. Now, if banks are comfortable lending to government because government is safe, they probably won't loan to the business sector. That is crowding out. So there is a lot of trickle-down effect that is not.
I wanted to ask you, Doctor.
Borrowing of budget can.
I just wanted to ask you, Doctor, are you against or you are for borrowing? Are you for borrowing or are you against borrowing? Because I'm
against domestic borrowing. I'm okay with foreign borrowing, but
Why?
it should have a cap because, as I said, there's what they call the crowding out effect. When the government goes to the I'm a banker, I've been a banker for 12 years. Most banks don't borrow to businessmen, and that is tailing the economy. If we're talking about economic growth, the real sector is starved of money. Most banks borrow to government, treasury bills, and they sit down and they are comfortable with that because they know they have return on investment. That is not good for the economy. I'm totally against that. And at the same time, we're spending most of our debt to service this domestic borrowing. Bankers are not doing anything. What is the function of banks? They are there to stimulate the economy. They're not there to advance just borrowing to the government. And that is what is happening right now.
Mr. Okorie, let me bring you in. You've been listening to him. Where do you stand on the issue of rebalancing rising debt as well as revenue? And perhaps are you for debt or are you against debt? That's, are you for borrowing or are you against borrowing? Which one?
Okay, sorry, I missed some words. I think the network. What was your question again, please?
Okay, my question is, are you for borrowing or are you against borrowing? Let's take it from there first. Are you against debt or you're for debt?
No, I would never be against borrowing, neither would I be against debt. However, sincerity of purpose and then the discipline required to ensure that what is borrowed is appropriated as planned is key. Now, if you check most foreign countries, they live highly on the credit society, meaning that much of the infrastructure was borrowed against payment across time. Now, what has happened in Nigeria is that there are some gaps between projects that have been instituted on loans, okay? One, either they're not completed or there's a misappropriation that takes place along the line, which ensures at the end of the day that we don't get the infrastructure. And remember, the infrastructure, depending on how the loan or the debt was created, whether it's a grant, whether it's meant to be paid back, and whatever period of time that was done. If you remember, in the recent Eurobond loans that were taken by the federal government, the intent was to dilute the weight of repayment on the government because of the time lapse, because they came cheaper. Now, even though you achieve the purpose of expanding or extending the repayment period, the question still lies, what were those debts or how were those debts created? Where are the commensurate infrastructure or commensurate initiatives that were that those loans were based upon? If they don't deliver on that, then we're not getting value, and then we get burdened with the debt which we have to pay for, which is why most times people say that government is mortgaging the future of our children, if at the end of the day, there is no value in return. Two, so I am not against that. I'm always for it. Even in the president's plan to borrow $30 billion, okay, which is to fund the
critical
budget at this current
infrastructure. Is that about 39 of them?
Yes, about 39 of them. We need to see the full breakdown of that. We need to understand where those monies are going to. I would even ask for an appraisal of the current loans that we have taken. If you looked at the states that were given money recently in some subvention from the government, many of them didn't even deliver on some of those aspects. So at the end of the day, we keep mortgaging ourselves, and we're not getting value at the end of the day. So it's
Okay.
about fiscal discipline.
Le-
That's where our issue lies.
Okay, let me now chip in this. What do you think will be the relationship between our growth? Because if you take a look at the budget 2020, government has anticipated a growth rate of about 2.93%. So what's the relationship between growth and our revenue? Bearing in mind that Moody's last week, which is the ratings agency, I don't know if you saw that, said that our revenue is weak, very low, in fact, about 8% of our GDP, and our fragility still continues. So how do you now juxtapose growth as well as revenue? And don't also forget that the president wants to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years. He did say that, I think, on the 12th of June of this year. So how do we how do we really balance all of this? You know, the numbers are they adding up?
No.
Well,
No.
like I said, there are many cosmetic issues that are applied to the politics of budgeting, okay? However, the real hard work needs to be done. And instead of even calling it a budget of growth and job creation, I will call it a budget of hard decisions. Because at the end of the day, there's a precedence at play. We keep planning budgets without performance, okay? Now, there are some estimates by the World Bank that our growth rate is in the positive index. However, the legal frameworks, like I said, need to be implemented to ensure that the anticipatory initiatives from the private sector take place. That's what is missing at the end of the day. That's where governance lies. And if that's not done, we can continue making these plans, and at the end of the day, the federal government will continue maybe with some martial laws. Take, for example, the border closure. The border closure is one of our biggest, how do I put it now? It's a dilemma in our face because there are claims that from the federal government that we needed to address some issues that were keeping us down or threatening our national security in terms of drugs, in terms of insurgency, in terms of proliferation of human traffic, as well as of fake goods and all of that. Now, place that against the losses in terms of trade, which would have taken place not just within our neighbors, but in as much as Nigerians producing locally who need to export their goods, earn foreign exchange, and bring back to the country. These are some of the issues, and instead of looking at how to improve our border control and security, we have blocked the movements of items, both outside and coming in.
Okay.
These are challenges that we haven't even calculated the losses to. Our ocean economy hasn't been put to use because of the lack of regulations.
Yeah.
Our aviation hasn't been put to full use simply because of some policies that we haven't fully implemented. This is where the value add within this budget and practically every other budget lies. If you don't do the legwork to the plans that you have given, then you're not going to reap from the fruits. You will come back. When was the last budget passed? This one is being passed at this time, which is being celebrated. The last one was passed, I think that was in June.
Yes, this year.
And the one before.
Yes.
Yes, and the one that was passed before then. So where is the work done? I'm hearing about budget passing, but I'm not seeing the other end of the retail chain, whereby the imports, the discussions on how well we have performed or what we have done to deliver on some of the items placed. Take, for example, education and health. Not much was allocated to those regions.
But in this 2020 budget, the National Assembly that's increased the budgets for education as well
Health
as
is
I think
43.
health,
I'm
yes,
not sure
and
health
also
was
for health, though it
26
increased
billion.
for works, yes, for works to about 300 billion or so. Then for health, I think health was increased to about 80 something.
46 billion.
No, I think 46 to 80 something billion.
Okay,
But anyway, because we just have less than 5 minutes to the end of the program, I'll come back to you in a bit so that you can give your closing remarks. But let me come to Dr. Audu. Speak to me about perhaps some of the sticky points for you with this 2020 budget, perhaps for benchmarks, or what else do you really need to, have to say concerning the 2020 budget?
Yeah, the overall view of the budget, in my view, is we are not optimistic enough. If you're talking about growth, you're talking about creating jobs, then we have to be more optimistic than where we are. Because first of all, it's not so much about the budget, but also the participation of the private sector, especially in job creation. And that's where the legislators come in. We need to pass legislation that is going to open the economy, that is going to free up the economy to outside and foreign direct investment. Like we had a summit, a diaspora investment summit some weeks back, and the question foreigners are asking is, what channel do we come in with our investment? Which areas do we invest in? What is the safeguard? So this is where we need to work harder in. We need to get our legislators to pass legislation. For example, now we had the conversation with the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, and rather than coming to Nigeria to invest, they took their investment to Kenya because the Kenyan legislators were able to meet up to their requirements in terms of passing legislation that encourages savings in Kenya. They did that and investment came in. So we need to work, the legislators need to work with the government, passing laws in order to free up the economy for investors to come. Okay. Secondly, talking about the border closure, I think what we are not having is a policy document. Border closure in its actual sense is a good thing because what we're trying to do is to grow, protect Nigerian industries, like the rice.
How good is it? Like what Mr.
Now,
Okorie
if we have a
said,
policy
there are
document,
companies here too that need to export
now,
their,
we should
their
not
goods.
Look,
and are we also looking at, he actually
we should
said
not look
something,
at
border security failure. Are we also talking about customs? If customs can do their work, would there be a reason to close the borders?
Yeah, we should not look at the short-term gains. We should look at the long-term gain. We have a country suffering from over 30% unemployment. We had over 110 textile companies, all of them closed, and we only have 10. We have a lot of, we are getting our foods, even sugar, we're exporting them from abroad. Now, we need to look inwards. Nigeria is a country with 200 million population, and we have a very huge land with many resources.
Okay,
we need to develop Nigerian industries and protect them. What we're not having is a policy document.
If
we have a long-term policy document, we'll be able to, the border closure will be a good thing to Nigeria because what that to stop will be dumping from other countries, especially the Chinese.
I'm rounding you
and
up
that will
right
now
now.
help.
I understand where you're coming from. Yeah. I do, because border closure is neither here nor there. You see some people for it, you see some people against it, with cogent arguments also. But Mr. Okorie, in just 30 seconds, give me your closing remarks.
My closing remarks is straightforward. I expect the government, through the legislator, to do their work in terms of creating the enabling legal and policy regulatory frameworks to empower this budget, to empower the different sectors of the economy that are itching to expand, itching to work, itching to bring in foreign investment and even optimize local investment so that at the end of the day, we can all be happy about what is to come. Secondly, as regards some of the initiatives government has taken, government
very quickly, we need to round up.
Yeah, government should be market-led and not led by martial law. Market-led policies speak to what is going on and enable the markets to be sustainable.
Okay. I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on the show today. Dr. Audu, thank you very much. Mr. Okorie, thank you very much from Lagos. All right, I've been speaking with Gabriel Okorie, public affairs analyst, as well as Dr. Aliyu Audu, an economist. we'll be looking at the 2020 budget as passed by the National Assembly. But we'll continue to look at that. We expect that perhaps in days to come, it's just how many days to the end of the year. Let's hope that the executive would have read the budget and the president will sign, and we'll take it from there. So thank you all for investing your time with us today on